Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Terrace Talk. Away from Championship action this week, but we are looking ahead to Norwich City's FA Cup third round clash at home to Premier League side Brighton. I'm Connor Southwell, standing in for Adam Harvey, whose throat I think is a little bit worse for wear. We're hoping to have him past fit for the game on Saturday, but I'm delighted to be joined by Brian Owen, who is a Brighton and Hove Albion reporter from the Argus. Brian, really delighted to have you with us, and hope you're all doing well. Let's start with the obvious question, really, because I think the FA Cup draw we all look at, and I know certainly I watch pretty keenly to see where Norwich are going to end up. So the fact it was a home draw was excellent. The fact it was a Premier League team was maybe one where you kind of go, that's a little bit of a shame, given maybe the chance for a cup run. But what was your kind of feeling when the draw came out and it was Norwich away for Brighton and for you guys?
Probably, like you say, a home draw is quite nice, although they can feel a little bit flat. FA Cup third rounds, home ties as well. So, away was fine. I then sort of found out the train situation, but I'm sure it'll be a nice drive up to Norfolk. And it's a little bit into the unknown, isn't it? Because you don't know what team's going to be lined up, and there's some interesting personnel ones for Brighton. But I'm sure it'll be, well, I'd imagine quite a difficult test, and obviously quite a nice ground to go to as well.
Yeah, and it's always interesting, isn't it, the FA Cup, because so many people talk about it. It doesn't quite feel like the competition that it once was. But I'm sure, following Brighton over the years, you've got some really fond memories of the FA Cup, or not so. What has Brighton been like, and what's the FA Cup been like for Brighton?
Yeah, not bad. I mean, I've seen them lose at Lincoln when they were in the National League, so that was probably the lowest point. Fikayo Tomori scored an own goal on his debut, if I remember rightly. I've been to two semi-finals, but not actually got past that. And I think losing on penalties to Manchester United was the particularly disappointing one. The previous one, they lost 1-0 to Man City, and they were almost the happier team afterwards because of what could have happened. Last season, I think the FA Cup, you're right, it's not what it was, but I think it is still quite a good opportunity for players, but also for fans to see games, maybe different people going to the games, lower prices. So although the FA Cup isn't what it was, in some reasons it's because it's for positive reasons. The final's not what it was because we now have football on every day. The third round's not what it was because crowds for league games are a lot higher than they used to be back in the day. So I think it's the negatives are for positive reasons, and there are good things you can get with the cup. And this is, it's a chance for people to go to games who don't normally, to pay less. And last season we went to Stoke at this time last year, and it was a really good match. A championship team, obviously, and it ended up 4-2. So I think, there are good memories, but it's not quite that intensity, certainly of a Premier League match day.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, isn't it? And that's what Norwich are looking at as well. But sometimes that break can be nice, can't it? So it's provides some good respite, provides, as you say, an opportunity for other players to have a look. I mean, let's talk about Brighton then, because I mean, a lot has happened. I can't believe it's I was looking fixtures between these two teams heading into this record, and it's been almost 3 years now since the teams last met, and I think it's fair to say a lot's changed at the Amex Stadium in that time. Obviously finished sixth in the 22-23 season, qualified for the Europa League, now really missed out on an FA Cup final, of course, after crashing out on penalties in the semi-finals. So I guess the question, I'm sure you have it a lot as someone that covers Brighton, and which is, what have the last few years been like? Because it feels like it's been maybe not constant progress, and there's been maybe seasons that haven't quite been, it's not been year on year progress, but the overall trend has been really positive for you guys on the South Coast largely.
Yeah, I think the way that the progress is best described is just being gradual, bit by bit, step by step. Almost you don't notice it, but then you see clubs shooting ahead and then dropping back. So generally it has been, even from, I've seen Brighton play Norwich in League One, so you go back that far, and the steps forward from then. It's been small steps, almost imperceptible at times. But for example, Europe was, outside of Norwich have had it as well. Europe was just an unforgettable experience, which personally I made the absolute most of it, thinking it might not happen again, or it might not happen for 20 years or something. So that was sort of fantastic. The De Zerbi interlude was brilliant for a while, and then became quite frosty, quite it obviously all came to an end at the end of last season. And now the season with Hertzler started really well. I don't know if the performances have changed that much, but the games are so on such fine margins, a ball hitting the post, staying out or going in, and the results have now dried up in terms of wins. They're drawing a lot of games. There's still points coming in, but one by one. So, I mean, to answer your question, it's been beyond what you could expect. Certainly, when I started covering Brighton after they'd just been relegated to League One, what's happened, and sort of covered my first game at Millmore, what's happened since then, it's beyond anything you could have expected.
Yeah, and it's interesting now, isn't it? Because Brighton are almost held up as one of these model clubs, that particularly when you're a Championship club, and people talk about it around Norwich really, and what they're trying to do. And I guess we might come on to that a little bit later. Really, is that when you're in the Championship and you're trying to do things a little bit differently, it's always Brighton and Brentford that get sort of held up as the model. So it's fair to say that sort of data led recruitment. Obviously, Tony Bloom, a fantastic sort of use of data, and has replicated that at some clubs around Europe now as well. How key is that consistency in the transfer market been for Brighton and that recruitment? Because it's one that gets spoken about a lot, but it's always interesting, I think, to get the view of perhaps someone on the inside. Is it as good and as positive as maybe as the narrative would seem to be from people sort of looking in from the outside?
I think some of these players, they're like unearthed from these different countries, and they're not really, because they're big stars in their own countries. So if you decided you were going to look for players in Ecuador, you would pretty soon come across Moises Caicedo, or in Paraguay. If you were looking for young talent in Paraguay, you would pretty quickly come across Julian Ciso. But I think one of the keys is getting the deals over the line, which isn't always that easy in some of these countries, and also what you do with the player. They've been really patient with quite a few of them. One player who springs to mind, because you mentioned the last time these teams met, there was a 0-0 draw at Carrow Road, which was, I know Norwich missed an absolute sitter, if I remember rightly, and Brighton were wasteful. And as we were watching that game, there were updates coming through that a player on loan from Brighton scoring a hat-trick in Belgium. And we thought, why isn't he here? And that player was Karu Mitoma. So the overnight sensation that was Karu Mitoma spent a season on loan. Caicedo went on loan to Beerschot and then played in the under-21s. I think the way the ones that have been, certainly the ones that have been successful, they've never been overnight successes. They've always been. So I think it's how you look after these players, the environment you put them in. So while the recruitment gets the praise, which I understand, I think there's a lot of other things. It's not just where do Brighton get these players from? Yeah, that's one question, but it's what do they do with them? So I think the way they've guided these players through very carefully has been key, and the sort of the succession plan in various positions. And in some positions they're not as strong as they are in others, but they've used loans and just that patience really well.
Yeah, and I guess it's probably not just recruitment either, because you look at even the managerial cycles that Brighton have been through, from Chris Hughton, who is obviously a name that Norwich fans know well. Probably the feeling around him and his tenure here is completely different to what it was at Brighton. But then Graham Potter, then De Zerbi, now obviously Fabian Hürzeler. I mean, you're 10th in the Premier League under obviously that new management. As you said, there was a lot of upheaval and change in the summer with Roberto De Zerbi leaving and then subsequently joining Marseille. So what are the fans feeling, and what is the general feeling around Hürzeler at this moment in time?
Probably it's the most uncertainty around some of the fans at the moment because of this run without wins, and that includes some matches which you would think they possibly could have won. Having won at home to Man City and then away to Bournemouth, which is probably even a better result than winning at home to Man City at the moment. They were so well placed to go second in the table, and now the 8 games without wins has included Southampton at home, Brentford at home. Obviously, they're pretty bad away for them. There was a game at West Ham when they probably should have won. There was a game at Leicester where they were 2-0 up with about 5 minutes to go. The old rivals, Crystal Palace, came down here and won. So I think you looked at where they were after winning at Bournemouth and the games to come and thought they could really get some serious points here going into Christmas, and they haven't. And sometimes it's been like really fine margins, just as some of their wins were really fine margins. So that run of 8 without a win most recently has included a draw at Aston Villa and a draw with Arsenal, which are good results in their own right. But they've, in some, obviously you say, what do the fans think? The fans think 30,000 different things, but there are quite a few for whom those 2 good points and decent performances are not enough to wipe out the disappointment beforehand. And actually, Fabian Hertzler is top of that list. So he said he was as disappointed with the draw against Arsenal as he was with any other recent match. When I asked him after the press conference whether he still thinks that, I don't know. But so I think at the moment there is a little bit of uncertainty. But equally, they're 10th. You know, until quite recently, Brighton's highest ever league position was 13th ever. And the performances, I mean, Paul Barber, the chief executive, has said the underlying performances are good. So I think it's just waiting. Maybe it'll be in East Anglia somewhere, but it's just waiting to get on this winning run. And I think, as I mentioned before we came on, ideally on Thursday, but Saturday would be nice too.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, he's an interesting appointment, I guess, because largely when he did arrive, there was so much made about his age, which you know, whether that should or shouldn't be a factor, I guess is probably a different conversation. But you know, we mentioned kind of maybe the continuity and the success they've had, sort of with managerial recruitment, which is very, very hard to get right. You don't need to tell Norwich fans that after the last few years and maybe some of the appointments that they've made. But there are a lot of similarities between De Zerbi and Hurtselaar. Are they quite different? How would you kind of compare the two of them?
Different, I would say. Hertzler is perhaps more like Graham Potter. De Zerbi was great fun. The football was, I mean, you've seen it with the passing from the back, and there's tactical differences, technical differences. I suppose different players have done more under one player than another, and you get that period where the new manager comes in and he wins the first few games, and it's like everything the old manager did was wrong and everything the new manager did was right. And now it's like, well, was he just building on what De Zerbi had done? De Zerbi was obviously more experienced, although not in English football, not in Premier League football, but he was more experienced in general, top tier football, should we say. Hurtselaar, because of his much better English, he probably gets his message across more effectively. He's probably a better communicator. He's pretty hot-tempered on the touchlines, like De Zerbi was. But yeah, there's great differences in. De Zerbi used to turn up half an hour to 40 minutes late for his press conferences. Hurtselaar is like 5 minutes early. So there are huge differences in personality. He is, yeah, as you say, he's young and it keeps being brought up. And I think he was getting a little bit bored with it being brought up as well. But he's still sort of 10 years older than some of his key players. So I think he's learning. I think there was a game at Chelsea where Brighton were fortunate to only concede 4 goals. They were torn apart time after time with their high defensive line, and he was more defensive in the press conference than his team had been on the pitch. Actually, he's sort of saying why they did it, and the goals weren't conceded because of the high line, and that was basically because Nicholas Jackson kept missing open goals. But he did adjust, he did adapt, and dropped a little bit deeper, and got good wins at Newcastle and Bournemouth. So I think he's new to the Premier League, he's new to top flight football. He's a real competitor, but he is a different personality to be similar to Potter, probably.
Yeah, well, there's only a 4-year difference or 3-year difference when the two managers meet this weekend. So
Right.
hopefully not too many comments in terms of his age. Look, you mentioned the League One days. There are you know, for both of these clubs, but there are plenty of connections playing wise between them. Elliot Bennett, Andrew Crofts, Ashley Barnes, of course, who's left Norwich very recently. But I did want to ask you about one who's still at Norwich, which is Shane Duffy, and you know, played 150 games for Brighton, part of the promotion-winning team. I guess the question, because it feels like he probably should be really fondly remembered. So how fondly is he thought of at Brighton? And I guess if he is involved, he's played more minutes than any other Norwich player this season. So I'm not quite, you know, they may opt to rest him for this one, but guessing the reception would be quite positive.
Yeah, I mean, sort of, he was coming back here. Obviously, it's away fans who are different anyway. If he was coming back to the Amex, he would get a fantastic reception. Hugely popular. Came in at the start of the season when Brighton were promoted. He just had that game for Blackburn when he scored 2 own goals and was sent off. Came in and when they started the season well, and from memory, the results weren't that good to start with, but he went on to become, I think he was player of the season. Was it the promotion season? But he was certainly massive alongside Lewis Dunk. Well, you know what he's like, just a sort of a tower of strength as centre back. And he got injured late in the promotion season at Nottingham Forest when Brighton lost. And at that period, I thought that could scupper the whole thing. They're going to miss out on promotion. And fortunately, another player came in and did well, but it was a massive loss. Did well in the Premier League, scored some goals, some really important headers, and him and Dunk with a lot of defending to do, as you can imagine. Brighton new in the Premier League. And then I think he added a little bit to his game when Potter came in, and he actually had not a renaissance, but just, and I think this has been referred to up in Norwich, that they've seen what he did in his latter stages at Brighton, did a bit more on the ball. I'm sure I've seen a goal where he's been, was it a goal late in the game where he strode forward like Beckenbauer late in
against
a
Preston, yeah. But I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that, because he was a little bit out of favour actually when there was a managerial change in the summer, and they spoke about how they'd shown him a lot of clips of how he'd played under Graham Potter and how they wanted him to almost go back to that. And ever since then, he's been fantastic, and as I say, been really consistent. And he said recently probably the most consistent that he's played since Brighton. So I think he's probably surprised all of us with maybe that ball playing ability.
I think he's got an old school nature about him as well, which Brighton fans find easily, or any fans find easy to identify with, easier than some of the players who come in from overseas. I think he identifies with the fun of the game off the pitch sometimes as well. He's full part of the promotion celebrations. He's got his own little bits in fans' folklore as well for that reason. And from our point of view, he was always somebody coming through the mix zone. If you're not quite sure who to talk to, he was one of the ones. There was 2 or 3 players back in those days where mixed zones sort of worked as they should do, who you knew you could talk to whatever had happened in the game pretty much. So he was a godsend for the media as well. Fans absolutely loved him. Had his critics in some areas of the match, but as we're sort of saying here, he did some areas of his game. But as we're saying, he did develop. He did add to his match, his game. So it's a shame if he doesn't play, because he would get a brilliant reception. And if it was down here, he would get a brilliant welcome back.
Yeah, I spoke to him after New Year's Day. I think he is really hoping to play, but I just think they may well end up managing his minutes. But look, whether he comes on or whatnot, I guess is probably a different debate. In terms of the FA Cup, then to sort of finish off and to really hone in on this game, what would I guess where in Brighton's mind is a cup run at the moment? Do you feel like there is a real appetite for one? There's obviously been, we mentioned 2 semi-finals in recent times. I'm sure that, for any club that is in that sort of Premier League bracket where perhaps they're not looking over their shoulder too much and whatnot, the sort of feeling is that you, amongst fans, that is, that you can push and hopefully try and add a cup to what you're doing. Are Brighton in a position where you feel that they're going to really target the FA Cup this season?
They have got an ambition to actually win a major trophy, and it's obviously not going to be the League Cup this year. I think that's one of the Tony Bloom, the chairman, has invested a lot, bit by bit, in the club, in the stadium, in the training grounds. And Chief Executive Paul Barber has said there's this ongoing aim to be a top 10 club, but he's also loved the club to win a trophy, if anything, just for Tony Bloom, to reward all that investment. So that is, it's a long way off going into third round day. Funnily enough, 2 years ago, I walked into the press room at Middlesbrough and somebody was talking about it being the 40th anniversary of Brighton reaching the final. And he's saying, what do you remember about this? And I said, hold on, we haven't even kicked off the third round yet. And as it turned out, they went to penalties against Man United in the semi. So they weren't far off. It is something missing. People say they haven't won a trophy. Well, they've won the division they've played in a few times, but it's obviously not the top division. Let's see if going into what we don't know, and I know it's the same at Norwich, is how the head coach will treat it in terms of selection. Because last year, the one manager I remember, funnily enough, who just threw out like 10 outfield players and made up a team of the 10 players who needed playing time, was Chris Hughton, who you'd think would have a great tradition, who has got a great tradition with the FA Cup. And you think back to Tottenham, and I remember him just using it as a rotation exercise. Whereas last year, Roberto De Zerbi basically put out his Premier League team. So we'll see. And I know Norwich as well, you're waiting to see how it gets treated. But of course, Europe is getting into Europe. It is a big aim as well. The ongoing every season is try and get into the top 10. But you can certainly get into Europe by winning an FA Cup. Yeah,
and this is I guess another consideration as well that you mentioned, and you've said it. You guys have got Ipswich away on the Thursday. I know there'll be a lot of people with a yellow and green persuasion wishing you particularly well for that fixture. But then obviously you've got Manchester United as well. So again, I know we'll wait and see, I guess, in terms of rotation. But if you were to put yourself in Fabian Herzl's shoes, how much would you be looking to rotate? Because obviously that's quite an intense schedule in sort of Premier League things are considered.
Yeah, but I think there are some positive rotations you can do as well. I think there are players for whom this game comes at a really good time. There's a new signing from Paraguay, Diego Gomez, midfielder. He was eligible to play against Arsenal, but they didn't put him on the bench. I just wonder if he's now got a chance to play. There are people such as Julio Enciso didn't play in the last game. Matt O'Reilly, big signing from Celtic in the summer, we probably haven't really seen the best of. He'll make a change in goal. He'll put Jason Steele in goal. They're a little bit short at centre back. They've just lost Igor Julio, Brazilian, to injury, and so Adam Webster, who's been out for a while, this is ideal for him. I would have thought to play. Tarek Lamptey, a right back. So there are a few who will come in, and that they can start Premier League games. They're that sort of quality, and it actually works quite well for them. And then there's a right back, Joel Veltman, I think will be rested. I would have thought Danny Welbeck would have been rested, but he's injured anyway. Lewis Dunk, if he comes back from injury, I don't know if he would actually play. We don't, as I say, we don't know how he'll treat it, the head coach. But I think there are some, there will be changes, but I think it's going to be quite interesting. It could be it's a player called Solly March. I don't know if I mentioned him, who's just come back from a serious injury. He made his breakthrough with a goal in pre-season against Norwich way back in 2013, I think it was. He's come on for 10 minutes so far in best part of 15 months. So it'd be great to see him get some time. I think that might happen. And I'm not sure who they play up front, basically, really, because they've got two injured. And would João Pedro play? I mean, that'll be interesting. Would he play João Pedro in the FA Cup? Key man up front? Or does he think we wrap him up in cotton wool, ready for Ipswich? I really don't know. I suspect there are some more who might get rested, but we'll just have to wait and see, and we'll speak to Hertzler tomorrow as well if he tells us anything.
Yeah, well, this is it. I think Norwich will definitely look to rotate and try and give some players minutes in certain positions. And I guess the final question, Brian, is how do you see it going? Obviously, a unique position probably for all of us in that there's no replays, so we're going to get a result on the day. How do you see it all unfolding at Carrow Road?
I quite like not knowing. I quite like it into the unknown. I'm not really bothered about having to make predictions or whatever. I'd like to say, Brighton get a narrow win and get a home draw. But last couple of years they've had a 4-2 at Stoke and a 5-1 at Middlesbrough, and it's been quite surprising how those two games have gone against Championship opposition. But nothing would surprise me. Might even get penalties, I suppose. So maybe just as well I'm not relying on the trains.
Indeed. Brian, thank you very much for your time. Obviously, anyone who wants to check out Brian's excellent work, the Argus is the best place to go. He'll obviously be providing all of the Brighton stuff ahead of this weekend, and I hope your journey up to Norfolk is nice and smooth. You'll certainly get a nice welcome when you come to Carrow Road. So we'll see you there. Thank you very much to you. Thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you again very soon.